Today's episode is brought to you in part by Smith & Co. Located in Detroit's Midtown, you're going to want to try some comfort food with a modern twist from Chef Jermaine Mills. And Smith & Co. has a brand new menu. Whether it's their new marble slab-fired pizza, kimchi fries, lentil bolognese, or Korean fried chicken sandwiches, you'll find something perfect to pair with a local craft beer from Nain Rouge Brewing just across the courtyard. And can we talk about dessert? They have one that features my favorite cookie on the planet Earth. Imagine an ice cream sandwich using Avalon sea salt chocolate chip cookies, vanilla ice cream, and some chocolate sauce. Smith & Co. is located over on Selden, just west of 2nd, and it opens at 4 p.m. Wednesday through Sunday. So get your next great meal and support those who support us. SmithandCoDetroit.com. That's SmithandCoDetroit.com. Hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Friday, December 9th, 2022. The holidays are upon us. We are in that month. I am Jer Stays, and on the other end of the line is...
Devon O'Reilly, Jer. I mean, it's Friday, so who else is it going to be?
All is right with the world as long as Devon O'Reilly is around for Friday.
Mr. Friday.
Mr. Friday.
Hey, that's a nickname. Where are we looking for a nickname?
There you go, Mr. Friday, Devon O'Reilly. That reminds me of a guy I know. His name is Bill. He's known as 11 o'clock Bill because every time he shows up at 11 o'clock at night, it doesn't matter if the party's over, whatever, he shows up at 11 o'clock. I don't know why. It's always 11:05. Oh, there's Bill, 11 o'clock Bill.
Fair enough. I like to think I bring the Friday vibes to any day.
There you go. See, this is why people like you so much, Mr. O'Reilly.
No, stop it.
Where have you been?
So I was somewhere pretty cool. And this time it's not a bar or a restaurant per se, although they actually kind of have both inside of the space. But I was doing my day job. And part of that was going to tour the LinkedIn office, which is not super new. I think it opened in 2018. It's right at 1515 Woodward Avenue. So just there along the Woodward corridor, the same block as like H&M and stuff, if people want to orient themselves. But I don't think a lot of people know that LinkedIn has a huge presence. They have 200 employees in downtown.
Wow, I did not realize that. Like I kind of thought it was one of those little flagship offices, you know, like when that was announced that Twitter was coming to downtown Detroit, it's really like an auto business sales office and it's a few people. So that's kind of what I assume what it is. I'm glad to hear that it's more than that.
Yeah, it is. It's multiple floors. They have the whole building essentially. So they've built up, I think, they built up 4 floors. They're building out a 5th one and they can go up to 8 floors there. And it's really cool. I mean, we talk about the workplace of the future. This looks like something you might step into in Manhattan at a Hudson Yard if someone had a site. It's really cool. It's the new kind of way of work, Jer, that we talk about where nobody has a set desk. Not even the highest up person in the office has their own office. It's all open spaces, shared offices, conference rooms, really cool spaces. Almost like you bring in kind of the kitchen concept becomes the center of the office now. You get the big island, you get all the goodies and snacks and beer taps and coffee taps and all that stuff. And that now becomes the center of the office. All the seating along the windows is basically communal. So it's like you don't have to be the CEO anymore to get a corner office. Anyone can sit in the corner office and look out on Woodward. You just got to get there early. So it's a really cool kind of example of, I think, of kind of where the future of office design space is going. And that's part of the reason why we went to go check it out. But it was really cool to see they have their own cafeteria on site. So again, when we're talking about how do you get people back to work downtown, they have a chef on site every day preparing lunch and snacks and all sorts of meals right there on site, which is really cool.
Interesting. So that building has a lot of history. It was originally, it's actually a blend at 1515 Woodward Avenue, is a blend of the Grinnell Brothers Music Building and the Sanders Building.
A couple of great Detroit institutions.
Yeah, like the Grinnell Music House was a huge thing for years, selling pianos and all of that kind of stuff. Like it's a pretty like big thing in Detroit history. Although I think a lot of people of like our generations, they really wouldn't remember it. It was kind of like done there, a while ago. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of interesting to see that. And I remember when the Sanders Building, now they took that facade bit off because, I mean, a lot of people were upset at the time because it was like a 1940s facade that had Sanders across it. But in reality, that 1940s facade covered what was the original facade of the building. So many buildings in downtown Detroit have had like multiple facades over the years.
Yeah, exactly. You peel one off, you get farther and farther back. But the LinkedIn office actually does nod a lot to Detroit's past, each floor has a different theme. So there's music, there's food, there's parks, and all the conference rooms are named after either, food in Detroit. There's like the Fago room, Rock and Rye. There's the Bumpy Cake, so nod to Saunders. It's really cool. And they have a music room. Obviously, that's self-explanatory. It's really cool the way they've set it all up. So very much a cool, it's a private, so I can't tell people to go check it out necessarily.
Right.
They do have a mind towards welcoming the community in and doing more things now that, we never say past COVID, right, Jared, but maybe post-pandemic, they have a mind to open it up more to community events and things like that. So you might have a chance to check it out yourself.
Yeah, I think there was a Black Star soccer event there connected to Detroit City FC recently. And what I want to ask you, Devon, is kind of what is the idea of their footprint here? Like 200 people isn't small. So what is the kind of work they're doing here?
Part of the global IT and security team is actually located here. So they have a good bit of that. There's a lot of sales and business development on the small business and middle market side. A lot of the people are in that space. There's a pretty large marketing team there. There's a data security team that's located there. So it's a different mix of teams. Basically, each floor is kind of a different subgroup of team. But they really are thinking about the future of the workforce and that talent pipeline conversation. And, LinkedIn really wants to kind of own that talent conversation from a digital perspective, but also kind of broader. And I know that you have a little bit of things to say about the kind of talent pipeline conversation because you were somewhere recently that was talking about that as well.
So I was at the MichAuto Summit, which is all about attracting talent, accelerating Michigan's talent future. And not just Metro Detroit, but all over the state. And full disclosure, as listeners of the show know, I moderated a panel. It was about why choose Michigan. But I want to get into the bigger takeaways of the event itself as opposed to a play-by-play. The speech that really stuck with me was Doug Song. Now, if listeners don't know, Doug Song is, I think, the first unicorn or one of the first unicorns in Michigan with selling a company for more than $1 billion. So I think $2.5 billion that he sold Duo to Cisco Security. And now he's kind of on to another activist career, building up Metro Detroit, Ann Arbor, the state. And he had some really sobering facts around startups and investment in Michigan, talking about how venture capital portfolio for startups has actually dropped 31% in the last 5 years, talking about who are we competing with as far as talent. So yes, we are in a global race, but we are directly competing with Ontario and Ohio, who are all doing major programs to attract tech talent and frankly, all kinds of talent. And basically, it wasn't necessarily like the big red alert light, but it was a very level-headed conversation with somebody who knows what it takes to make these companies go about what we need to do in Metro Detroit. So one of the things he highlighted, Austin, right? Austin's a huge area for tech investment right now in Texas, right? Everyone says, oh, Texas, low taxes, warm weather, whatever. You know what else is Austin's doing? Austin's doing a $7 billion transit plan. $7 billion.
Wow.
I mean, the numbers are just stunning with these things. Then talked a little bit about Columbus and their ability to take people from Ohio State and then have jobs there for their entire cycle so that they're able to keep more of those graduates there in Columbus. As I've mentioned, I've visited there. It's a city that's been growing population while Detroit's been shrinking. There are things where I don't think we should steal every idea, but we should definitely greatly imitate and then make it our own, these ideas, knowing that we are in a true talent race between Ohio, Ontario, and the world to get huge opportunities out there because there's going to be so much reshoring from China back to the United States. That's a national security concern with this war in Ukraine and everything else. We've realized there's supply chain issues. We've realized that so much of the stuff that we need is offshore and we're dependent on it. We need to bring it back, even if it costs more. It's a national security priority that we are more self-reliant. And that money could easily come to Metro Detroit and Michigan, but we have to be ready for it. And it's not just about the jobs being available, but it's the things we talk about on the show, Devon, quality of life, walkability, neighborhoods, all those things, the things that people who have the ability to choose anywhere they want to work so that they choose here.
I understand why Doug was kind of sounding the alarm because there's not a lot of time to waste here. Other places are eating our lunch, so to speak. We've got to work quickly and we've got to do some big, bold things here and think like entrepreneurs in terms of if we want to attract that talent. It's interesting you mentioned about the investment that Austin has in transportation. I mean, I'm looking at the census. They had less people than Detroit 12 years ago. And now they've grown so much that they're still not, I mean, they've got 960,000 now. They're a comparable city from a population standpoint in Austin proper versus Detroit proper. It's not completely incomparable. And the fact that they're spending that much on transportation, I don't know what else to say on that, Jared. Like, the transportation thing.
We're going to talk about it in a minute here with the story.
We're going to beat that drum forever, and I just don't know if we're going to get the traction that we need. I'm going to throw it out there, and this may be a controversial thing, but like, I think we have to think beyond it. And what if we don't? What if we never get the support for mass regional transit? What do we do then?
See, I think that the winds are blowing differently now than I did 6 months ago. Number one, that vote to reinforce SMART went way better than anyone expected. And number two, and this was talked about behind the scenes at this conference, no one can underestimate the amount of change that is going to happen with state policy in the next 2 to 4 years. Because for the first time in our lifetimes, or our cogent lifetimes, it's a Democratic majority. Democrats control the entire chain. And so if there is ever a time to say memorialize transit funding where it's no longer necessarily up to a vote every 4 years so that places like SMART can go ahead and actually invest in bonds and things to build out, this is going to be the time. If it's going to be things like Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act that is frankly supported by most people on both sides of the aisle about making sure that there are protections in Michigan law for same-sex workers, this is the time. And we are about to embark on a warp speed change in Michigan policy in the next 2 to 4 years, because all these things that people in the left and center kind of wanted to push through, there's a lot of change that's going to be ahead, I think. And so I think we do need to think like what you're saying, but if we're going to do it, it's going to be the next 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that goes both ways. It's like, you're absolutely right. But then if it doesn't happen now, it ain't going to happen. So now is the time. So Doug's song is absolutely right. The siren is going off. The bells are ringing. We have about, couple years to make a huge difference and put some things in place. And if we don't, then we are really, really screwed.
Oh, yeah. Some of the things that are coming out of that, I wanted to mention, there was actually a $2 million grant announced to grow that high-tech talent pipeline. It's definitely a start, and I think it needs to be part of a greater conversation of long-term programs. And I even mentioned this on the panel where I said, there have been so many programs over the years, Devon, and you and I have both seen them. I mean, there are some people who have done way better than others, but heck, I was part of a program 8 years ago that there was 2 years of funding, and that's it, right? Where it needs to be more like Pure Michigan, where it's decades of impact to get that message out there that Michigan is a great place to live, work, and play. And same for Metro Detroit, and really invest those dollars, because it's going to take dollars to do it.
Yes, absolutely. At the end of the day, that massive dollars. And this is the time to do it. And it has to be, as we say, kind of sustainable dollars where, like you said, it's not just funding for a year, not just funding for 2 years, but funding for decades to come. And that has to be ingrained. And the only way we're going to do that is through legislature. So I'm optimistic, but I'll be the cynic here, Jared, and say, you can never be too optimistic with politics and politicians. So we will see.
Yeah. And of course, listeners, if you've got ideas of what you think needs to improve in Metro Detroit and Michigan, or what should be priorities, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Our audience is like 85% 45 and under. So it's something where you all are the people that these people in this room we're talking about keeping here and attracting. So we want to hear from you. All right, let's get into some news, Devon.
Let's do it, Jared. What do we got?
All right, we got a few headlines we want to get through real quick. One I wanted to start with ties to that transit thing. The state of Michigan, the legislature has approved $85 million of subsidy for Detroit's QLINE streetcar. That's going to be over the next 17 years. I've been watching this story for a few weeks saying, is this thing going to come together? I'm actually a little bit surprised that it has so much bipartisan support, but it does. It passed overwhelmingly through the House and Senate. It's sitting at the governor's desk as we record this. Now, it is reported by many news outlets as like a state subsidy, but in fact, the money is going to come from hotel and liquor taxes, which I think is a smart move, because the QLINE needs funding outside of whatever the RTA does in order to be sustainable, because it's really hard regionally to make the case for the QLINE to somebody who lives in Oakland County, and especially as it serves from Grand Boulevard to, the spirit of Detroit. This subsidy will keep ridership free, which I think is important to adoption and usage. But I have some strong things about the QLINE after watching it for a few years.
Yeah, and I've become a little bit of a skeptic on the QLINE, so maybe we're in alignment here, Jer. It's a nice toy. It's a fun little thing to have. It's not regional transit by any stretch of the imagination, and I agree with you or whoever else. It needs to be free at this point. Like, it's not really going anywhere, so let's be honest, we can't pretend like we can charge a price for this because it doesn't really do anything. It just takes you up Woodward faster than if you were walking or, biking or whatever. So it's still not a regional transit option until it grows beyond its current footprint. And that's going to be a really expensive endeavor here. So right now, it's kind of like a fun little thing to take you to different restaurants and bars and places. So I totally understand why it comes out of that fund for the liquor and hotel tax. You're right. That's the right place to take it from.
It's a tourism train at this point. Right. I was going to push back and say, I don't think it has no purpose. I think it has purpose, and I think it could have even better purpose. But its purpose is definitely aligned with visitors and tourism and occasional trips.
It's a better people mover.
After thinking about it and having a 44-minute wait for Noel night for the QLINE, where I was going to see it and show it off and then just completely failed, I have an unpopular opinion, as they may say.
Okay. Let's see if I agree with your unpopular opinion.
We need to move it to the center lane. It's time. It has to move back to the center lane. I used to think it was signal priority. I used to think it was all these things. As I was around in Noel night, people don't know how to park. Running this thing against the parking lane was an absolutely terrible idea. I'm sorry, Dan Gilbert, that's what you wanted to do. I think it was completely wrong. I think there is no way to get it to the service levels that you want to get it to without moving the sections of track to the center. Maybe you don't do it like right in the core Woodward up to Grand Circus Park. Of course, you and I have talked about shutting down that area before as a walkable area. That's a whole different conversation. But I think north of Grand Circus Park, all the way up, I think it needs to be moved to center lane. Otherwise, you're going to have these problems no matter who manages it.
Well, Jared, that's a worthy goal, and I don't disagree with you, but I also want to temper your expectations. That's not going to happen because it's too expensive. They're not going to do it at this point. The die is cast, so to speak. The tracks are laid. They're not going to rip up those tracks and move them to the center lane. I don't see it happening.
It would take a lot of money. Anything's possible with money.
It would take a lot of money, Jared, but no one cares to invest that much in the QLINE. Is it actually worth it for how many more riders?
If you actually did an expansion plan where you said you were going to take this to 8 Mile or Ferndale, I think you have to do that.
Okay,
I think
fine.
you have
I'll
to
give
include
you
a move as part of that if you ever did an expansion plan.
If you expanded it, then you have to move it. Agreed. But in its current format, the tens of millions of dollars it would take to rip up the tracks and move them isn't worth what we said. Is it's a nice toy to have for the tourist situation downtown. So it is what it is at this point, unless it gets expanded, which maybe this funding can help do that.
Another story I wanted to highlight, this is actually in Bridge, Detroit, talking about the city of Detroit's budget and investment priorities. And there's some interesting things here. Now, there's a lot of serious stuff like sewer improvements that would be north of, $500 million that are frankly necessary. And you can go to the whole story. I will link to it in the show notes to find your improvement du jour. But as far as like fun stuff, I wanted to highlight a few things because it is Friday.
Okay, Jared, let's do it.
Hart Plaza may actually get some money, Devon.
It's looking a little shabby these days, so I wouldn't mind getting some dollars for Hart Plaza.
Yeah, they're targeting about $18 million in improvements. I would like to see even more spent on it. Hart Plaza is one of those places that never really lived up to the original architect's dream. There were great plans with that fountain and everything else, and none of it ever worked right.
It's so much concrete, Jer. So much concrete.
Oh, and it wasn't necessarily supposed to be the way that it is today. So if you could do something where you included more green space, maybe included something where you go to a festival or something on there, it can turn into a scorcher really fast.
Yeah, exactly. It can get really packed. It's a weird kind of space, but it literally is kind of like the crown jewel area of downtown. It is where we should have our victory parades for the sports teams, God willing they ever win one. That should be the kind of the space where it all happens. And it doesn't feel like it right now.
Yeah. And that fountain designed when it was, I don't think technology was where it could be to do it, but I feel like we could do something a lot closer, with today's modern technology and microprocessors and everything else.
Oh, it could be so much better.
Oh, yeah. Like we could do something. It may not look exactly the same with all of the programming, but I think there was a great original vision with that fountain. You should go Google that up. Maybe I'll find some links to it, but it was supposed to be something amazing. And I just wanted to highlight Hart Plaza because that's something like I think the whole region will benefit from. Of course, sewer improvements. Don't get me wrong. That's important. But I think we've covered that on the show a number of times that a ton of money needs to be spent there. Also, improvements to the golf courses of Rackham, Chandler, and Rouge, which I think a lot of people will like. A bunch of money for parks, the Joe Louis Greenway, money for harbors, and a rebuild of one of the sheds in Eastern Market, rebuilding Shed 4.
That's fantastic. I mean, that will certainly get use. The sheds in Eastern Market now are, they do tons of events. So great use of funds there. And the golf course is awesome. I mean, I've actually golfed Rouge Park several times. It's a really great course. Seriously, it's a really cool course. It almost feels like it doesn't feel like you're in Detroit. It feels like you're in the forest almost. It's really cool. I mean, there's all sorts of animals, woodland creatures that'll cross your path during the golf game. But no, I really love the Rouge Park course. So I'm glad to see it get some more funding.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that's on this list that's way more for a podcast. I just want to highlight a few of the more fun ones. I will link to it in the show notes. But I'm glad to see a plan looking forward for what are we going to do to improve things as opposed to being completely always in bandage mode, you know?
Yes. Again, looking forward. I think that's kind of the theme, is like looking ahead instead of trying to fix things that are completely dilapidated or destroyed. Getting ahead of these improvements, making sure that the things that are working well now that do need maybe a little bit of improvements are sustainable in the long run. And I think that's what these dollars are about.
Before we go, let's talk about something in your direction, Devon. Some hotel news that I did not realize. In fact, I was a little bit mistaken at first.
Well, look, if I can't be on top of the Dearborn scuttlebutt, then I'm not worth the price of admission here. So the Dearborn Inn is closed. Those of you know it. It's off of Oakwood Boulevard near Greenfield Village. It's closed, and on its face, that may seem like a bad thing, but I've actually kind of got some intel that I know to be true, that it's undergoing massive, massive renovations. So basically, the Dearborn Inn, it was a Marriott brand. It had gotten a little tired, a little behind the times, but it's getting a massive revamp as a part of that whole Ford expansion. I mean, Ford is doing so much around there with their new central campus, their new engineering building, all that stuff. Again, drive down Oakwood Boulevard, you're going to be surprised. There's a lot of stuff going on. And so this is all part of that kind of Ford project, and they're really going to take the next year to invest a ton of money in renovating the hotel, bringing it back up to the stars that it needs to be. It'll maintain that Marriott brand and kind of become a signature hotel. So it's good news that it's closed. They're revamping that. And gosh, I got to tell you, Jared, I don't think people realize what a historic gem the Dearborn Inn is.
And a lot of like the grand rooms and stuff have some amazing details.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It was opened by Henry Ford. So that Ford test track, and we're getting into deep Dearborn conversation, which I don't mind having. But that test track that's across Oakwood Boulevard, attached to the Ford campus, that used to be Henry Ford's airport. It was a private airport. So it was the first airport hotel when it opened. Like the first airport hotel in the country when it opened. It became the first hotel to have air conditioning. Seriously. So first hotel ever to have air conditioning. Also, the first hotel in Michigan to have a direct dial telephone for guests. So direct dial type of stuff. You don't have to go through an operator. It also has been credited with influencing kind of the evolution of destination resorts. So back in the day, you'd fly into Ford Airport, you would just walk across or take a little buggy across to the Dearborn Inn, and that was kind of your resort there with your pool and your restaurants and all that. So there's a lot of history here at the Dearborn Inn, and it's really cool that it's again, like we talked about, Jer, it's not getting left behind. It's getting reinvested in, and it's going to continue to become a gem for the city and the region.
I was watching one of those History Channel things. I think, because there was like the Men Who Changed America or whatever. And
Men Who Built America, yeah.
Yeah, Men Who Built America. This is the inventions. I watched the one about the inventions that built America. And one of the themes that came through it that I just, I kind of knew, but I didn't truly appreciate was all the ways that Ford was involved in different inventions throughout the entire country tied to Ford and all of his side businesses, even like the development of commercial aircraft, all these things like Ford dabbled in and then got out of, or was a part of, or a quiet investor, like the power drill. The power drill being such a big deal was because Ford commissioned one of the drill companies that's still around to this day to build a handheld power drill. And then they end up selling a bunch more of them because all of a sudden people realized that they were stealing the power drills from work to go do work at home with stuff that they needed to like drill holes or put in screws and stuff like that. So like all these random things. And this seems like another one where I didn't realize like the whole hospitality bit to it. But if we think about the empire that Ford was back in the day, setting aside anything personal about Henry Ford, the man himself, the empire that Ford built through him and his sons and grandsons had so much impact with things over that entire century.
Yeah, I mean, in conversations like this, you have to separate the man from kind of the ideas and the career. And, we're clearly not endorsing many of Henry Ford's personal beliefs, which were terrible. But he was almost an inventor and an entrepreneur to a fault. He just could not keep his hands off of if there was something going on. If he was going to do a hotel, then he was going to get involved in all the aspects of the hotel, and he was going to help design the rooms and figure out all the cool inventions that were going to go in them and make sure the airport was cutting edge. So he was almost an inventor and an entrepreneur to a fault because he just has his hands in so much. And you only think about him for automobiles. But I mean, he really was, again, from a career perspective, from a business perspective, from an innovation perspective, one of the greatest entrepreneurs of the last, 150 years.
And his kids don't get enough credit sometimes. And I often wonder if Edsel Ford had lived longer. He was the one who was behind commissioning the Diego Rivera mural at the DIA. It was very controversial at the time. I often wonder if Edsel Ford had lived longer and not fallen ill so early, what it would have been, because he really had like the invention mind to do things. And people pin the Edsel on him, the Edsel car, but he didn't do that. That was more of a tribute vehicle to him. A lot of the things he came up with ended up being very innovative, and he ended up, even modernizing things like labor relations when Dad was very stick in the mud.
Yeah, Jerry, we could go another hour right now, so we probably should stop. But I could talk about Edsel Ford and the tragedy of that for a long time. I mean, really a neglected son. Basically Henry Ford felt almost challenged by Edsel, and for whatever reason, again, not a great guy, Henry. He felt challenged by Edsel to a fault where he cast him aside, where Edsel actually had all the genius of Henry Ford, in my opinion, but he was much more progressive thinking for the times. He was much more forward thinking. When Henry said the Model T is the best car that has been invented and will ever be invented, Edsel said, no, Dad, you're wrong. There's going to be a lot cooler cars invented, and we got to start working on them. And that was part of that huge conflict that they had that ultimately, Edsel, a lot of reasons led to his demise, but I mean, he had alcohol issues and he had some severe family conflict, and that certainly didn't help speeding up his end of life, unfortunately. But I agree with you, Jerry. If Edsel would have been around, not that Ford didn't do well for itself, but I think maybe Ford could have been the number one automotive company in the world under his watch. I mean, Henry led it there and then lost it, and I think Edsel was poised to bring it back. So that's a conversation for another time.
For sure. We should probably get a historian on for that. That would be a lot of fun for a future episode.
You mean I don't count as a local historian?
Oh, you'll be on there, but we got to get, you know what I mean? Somebody who's like...
a professional. Yeah.
All right, Devon O'Reilly, it is so good to talk to you, sir.
Always great to talk to you, Jerry, about anything and everything, right?
And thank you, of course, to our listeners. If you've got feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, think about becoming a member, patreon.com/dailydetroit. That and our sponsors help make sure that we can financially keep this thing going. It's so important. Thank you to everyone who makes this show happen all week. Thanks to Cheyenne Noams Nocerini, Ravishing Randy Walker, the Link Master Luciano Marcone, and of course, Mr. Friday, Devon O'Reilly.
Mr. Friday, I love it. TGIF.
With that, I'm Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.